They said the Wind River Range swallowed what it couldn't forgive. But on the coldest night of the year, when a battle-scarred veteran braved a blizzard to answer a dying sound in the snow, he found something no man was meant to find. 3 Mustangs, half buried and still breathing, their bodies marked by more than just the storm. Saving them should have been the end of the story. Instead, it became the beginning of a fight against power, silence, and the ghosts of a science that tried to play God. What rose from that storm wasn't just survival, it was a reckoning. The night had teeth. Wind howled through the Wind River Range, tearing across the ridges like a starving animal. Snow didn't fall so much as it attacked, driven sideways, biting through the seams of the world. The world beyond Jack Monroe's cabin had vanished, swallowed by a white nothingness that screamed. From inside, he watched it through a small frost-laced window. The storm clawed at the glass like something alive, each gust shaking the old wooden frame. Beyond it, the black silhouettes of pines bent and cracked under the onslaught, their breaking limbs echoing like distant rifle fire. He knew that sound too well. Jack leaned his shoulder against the log wall, the low fire painting his cabin in restless orange light. Shadows danced across the walls, shifting, fleeting shapes that looked too much like ghosts. He rubbed the old scar along his jaw with a callous thumb. "This storm's got teeth," he muttered. The words hung in the air, half curse, half admiration. He'd seen worse, in mountains, in deserts, in the eyes of men. But out here, alone in the Wyoming wilderness, there was no backup, no radio, no second chances. He added a log to the fire, watching sparks leap up the flue. The heat pressed against his face, but it couldn't drive out the chill that lived deep inside him, the one no fire ever could. The cabin smelled of pine resin, coffee grounds, and oiled metal. On the mantel sat a faded photo. 5 Marines in desert gear. One of them younger, unscarred, smiling. The others were gone now, buried in sand half a world away. Jack was 46, tall, lean, all angles and edges. His eyes held the far-off look of someone who'd seen too much sky, too much war. He'd done 2 tours in Afghanistan, reconnaissance and retrieval. He'd come home with a chest full of ribbons and a head full of ghosts. So he'd bought this forgotten cabin on Cold Ridge and fixed it up himself, plank by plank, until it was less a house and more a fortress. He hunted, chopped wood, and kept to himself. He liked it that way. Silence didn't ask questions. Still, something felt off tonight. The storm had a pulse, a rhythm that tugged at his nerves. He tried to shake it off, poured himself coffee from a dented tin pot. The bitter heat grounded him. Then, from somewhere beyond the window, a sound rose, thin, high, and wrong. He froze. At first, he thought it was the wind twisting through the ravines. But it came again. A cry, sharp and mournful, swallowed almost instantly by the blizzard. It had tone, it had pain, it had intent. Jack set his mug down. He turned off the lantern, plunging the cabin into half-darkness. Years of training whispered in his blood. Listen first, move second. He stood by the window, eyes narrowing, straining against the howl of the storm. The cry came again, fainter now, fading east, down near the frozen creek bed. "That's not the wind," he muttered to himself. He grabbed his leather jacket, pulled a wool cap low, and reached for his flashlight and rope. The air that hit him as he opened the door was a living force, a wall of cold that stole his breath. Snow whipped into the cabin in a frenzy. He had to throw his weight against the door to shut it behind him. Outside, the world was white chaos. Visibility was 10 feet at best. The path to his woodpile was already buried. Each step was a battle. Snow filled his boots, slammed against him like a fist. But that sound, whatever it was, pulled him forward. He moved by instinct, crouched low, keeping the flashlight beam close to the ground. The light caught swirls of snow, glints of ice, nothing else. Then he heard it. Faint, metallic. Clink, clink. A rhythmic scraping beneath the wind. He turned sharply, angling toward it. Another 20 feet, the air thick with spinning frost. The beam of his flashlight hit something dark, curved, half buried. For a moment he thought it was a fallen tree. Then it moved. Jack dropped to his knees, brushing away snow with gloved hands. What emerged made his stomach knot. A horse. It lay on its side, its flank twitching weakly. A massive stallion, black as coal, a snarl of barbed wire dug deep into its chest and legs. Blood frozen into the metal, its breath came in shallow puffs of steam. Jack's training took over. He pulled the knife from his belt and began sawing through the wire. The rusted metal bit into his gloves, but he didn't stop. The stallion flinched but didn't strike out. It simply endured. "Easy. You're okay now," Jack muttered, his voice low and steady. When the last strand snapped, he rolled the heavy body enough to free the limbs. The animal's head lifted slightly, its eyes glassy but aware. Jack shined the light along the drift and froze again. Two more shapes, a smaller mare, and beside her a foal barely old enough to stand. Both half buried, both unmoving. He stumbled to them. The mare's belly was swollen, pregnant. Her back leg was torn open, the wound crusted black. The foal, a thin youngling with a pale, ash-grey coat, shivered violently, its breath little more than a wisp of mist. Jack cursed under his breath. He couldn't save them all out here, but he couldn't leave them. He wrapped a blanket from his jeep around the mare's neck, tied a rope under her chest. The stallion tried to rise but collapsed again. Jack looked from one to the other, then made his choice. "Hang on," he said to all of them. "I'll get you out." The trip back to the cabin was hell. He dragged, pushed, pleaded. The storm clawed at him. The first haul, he got the stallion halfway, then collapsed. The second, he returned for the mare, guiding her as she staggered. Last came the foal, bundled in his coat, pressed against his chest for warmth. By the time he slammed the cabin door shut, he could barely feel his hands. He laid them out by the fire, one by one, the flames flickering over their trembling bodies. Steam rose as the snow melted from their coats, filling the room with the heavy scent of wet fur, smoke, and blood. He worked fast, towels, water, bandages from his medkit. He cleaned wounds, wrapped legs, massaged stiff muscles. Minutes blurred into hours. At last the stallion's breathing deepened. The mare stirred, her ears flicking toward the fire. The foal gave a weak whinny, a soft, broken sound that made something deep in Jack's chest tighten. He leaned back on his heels, staring at them. They weren't just surviving, they were fighting. He touched the stallion's neck, feeling the faint rhythm of a heartbeat. "You're a fighter, huh?" he murmured. "Spirit, that's your name." The horse's ear twitched, as if it understood. He moved to the mare, brushing his hand along her scarred flank. "You, Echo. You look like you've carried too much already." Her breath hitched, slow and heavy. Finally, he turned to the foal, curled in the blanket. "And you," he said softly. "Ash, you're the spark that's left." The storm howled outside. Inside, the fire cracked, steady and warm. 3 names spoken into the heart of a blizzard. Jack sat down heavily in his chair, exhaustion pressing into every muscle. His mind, always alert, began to drift. Who would leave 3 horses tangled in barbed wire in a storm like this? It didn't feel random. It felt deliberate. He looked down at Spirit. The stallion's flank rose and fell with a steadier rhythm. Jack reached out, resting his hand on the animal's neck. The warmth of life pulsed faintly under his palm. "You've fought enough," he whispered, his voice rough. "You're safe now." The words were for the horse, but they lingered in the air, echoing somewhere deeper. For the first time in years, he wasn't entirely alone. And in that fragile moment between night and dawn, a man who'd given up on the world unknowingly stepped into a story that would change everything. The storm had broken, but its ghost still lingered. The sky above the Wind River Range was a pale, impossible blue. Snow blanketed the land in a glittering silence. Inside the cabin, life had returned to the wounded. The 3 Mustangs, Spirit, Echo, and Ash, were standing. They'd survived the storm, but it was more than that. It was like they were remembering something. Jack leaned against the doorway of the makeshift stall he'd built. He watched them as a man watches a miracle he doesn't trust. Spirit, the big black stallion, stood tall, his eyes following Jack with unsettling intelligence. Echo grazed quietly, her scarred flank rising and falling, and little Ash pawed at the hay with surprising strength. Jack had tended to them like soldiers under his care. But what unsettled him wasn't how they healed. It was how they healed so fast. By the second morning, the deep cuts on Spirit's chest had sealed, leaving nothing but faint, clean lines beneath his fur. Echo's leg, once torn open, now carried her steadily. It made no sense. These weren't the wounds of wild animals. They were healing like something else. When Jack opened the stall door, he expected them to stumble. Instead, they stepped out in perfect formation. Spirit first, then Echo, with Ash trailing between them. Heads high, steps measured. No confusion, no hesitation. He frowned. This wasn't wild instinct, this was training. Later, while splitting logs, he tossed a scrap of wood toward the edge of the corral. Instantly, all three lifted their heads, ears pricked, bodies tense, as if waiting for a command. Spirit snorted, moving subtly to place himself between Jack and Echo. It was a protective, intentional gesture, the kind of move he'd seen from men guarding their own in the field. He stood there for a long while, the cold biting through his gloves, trying to decide if what he was seeing was real. It wasn't. It couldn't be. When the sun reached its highest point, its light caught in Spirit's mane. For the briefest moment, Jack thought he saw a glint of something that wasn't ice. Something metallic. He blinked, shook his head, but a feeling crawled up his spine, one he couldn't name. Part awe, part fear. That night the cabin was quiet. Jack sat beside Spirit with a brush, methodically cleaning dried mud from the stallion's neck. As his fingers passed over a patch of skin just beneath the mane, they found a groove, a faint, smooth indentation. He leaned closer. There, beneath the coarse black hair, was a mark, not a scar, not a brand. Something else. He wiped it clean with a damp cloth. Grime and soot peeled away to reveal thin lines etched into the skin. Perfectly straight, they shimmered under the lamplight. E13. The numbers were razor-sharp, as if burned in by a beam of light. Not something done by hand. Not out here. Jack's pulse quickened. He checked Echo next. On her shoulder, hidden under a layer of new fur, was another code. F2. The edges were just as clean, just as precise. He moved to Ash. When he reached to comb the foal's mane, his fingers hit something hard beneath the skin near the neck. A small, cold lump of metal. He fetched his knife, sterilized it in the fire, and carefully pried it free. The object was round, slick, no bigger than a coin. It shimmered faintly blue under the lamplight. Etched across its surface in tiny letters were words he could barely make out. Equinox Asset Tag C3. A chill spread up his arm despite the heat from the fire. He'd seen tech like this before. In Afghanistan. Used to track K9 units and drones. He stared at Spirit, who met his gaze without flinching. Those eyes weren't wild, they were aware. "You're not wild," Jack whispered, the words tasting wrong in his mouth. "You're soldiers." He set the chip on the table beside his old military knife, two relics of a past that refused to stay buried. He opened a worn notebook and wrote in his clipped, soldierly hand, 3 Mustangs found. Signs of engineered origin. Whoever owned them didn't deserve them. Outside, the wind brushed against the eaves. A metal stirrup hanging by the door swayed, making a faint clink-clink, a sound like a warning. 3 days after the storm, supplies began to run low. Jack packed his old pickup truck, a battered Chevy with rust along the fenders. Spirit gave a soft whinny as Jack closed the corral gate. The stallion pawed at the snow, his breath fogging the cold air. "Easy, boy," Jack said, resting a gloved hand on the horse's muzzle. "You've earned a rest." The engine coughed before roaring to life. The tires crunched over ice as he started down the mountain. It was 20 miles to Cold Ridge, the nearest sign of civilization. Jack hadn't been there since autumn, but now necessity overrode solitude. Halfway down the trail, he spotted them. Faint tire tracks cutting through the snow, fresh enough to glint. Someone else had been up here, recently. He slowed the truck, scanning the tree line. Nothing moved but the wind. Still, a ripple of unease crawled beneath his skin. He pressed the gas and kept driving. Cold Ridge looked unchanged, the kind of town time forgot. A single main street, a steepled church, a diner with faded red paint. When Jack pulled up outside McHale's Feed and Supply, the rumble of his truck drew eyes. Outsiders were rare, recluses from the ridge rarer still. Inside, old man McHale greeted him with a weary smile. "Been a while, Jack." Jack nodded, wordless as ever. He bought antiseptic, salt blocks, and 2 bales of hay. "Heard that storm near wiped out the North Ridge," the old man said. "You get through all right?" "Still standing," Jack replied. He paid in cash and was tying the tarp down in the truck bed when a shadow fell across the snow. "Afternoon, Jack." He didn't need to turn around to know that voice. Sheriff Hale Danner. The man looked like he'd stepped out of a recruitment poster. Broad shoulders, polished badge, a smile that never reached his eyes. "Heard you've been keeping company up on Cold Ridge," Hale said, nodding toward the back of the truck. "Couple of Mustangs, right?" Jack's grip on the rope tightened. "Something like that." "Funny thing," Hale continued, his tone casual but sharp. "Equinox Biotech out of Riverton filed a report last week. Missing stock. 3 head of experimental Mustangs. You wouldn't happen to know anything about that, would you?" Jack turned to face him fully. The air between them felt colder than the snow. "They weren't yours to begin with." For a heartbeat, neither man moved. Then Hale chuckled softly. "Careful, Jack. Around here, people mind their own property." He tapped the side of the truck, the metal ringing under his knuckles. Then he walked away. Jack watched him go, every instinct screaming that this wasn't over. Across the street, behind the fogged glass of the Cold Ridge diner, someone else had been watching. Clara Winslow sat in a corner booth, a half-empty mug of coffee cooling beside her laptop. The Denver Chronicle badge clipped to her jacket marked her as press. She hadn't meant to eavesdrop, but the tension between those 2 men was impossible to ignore. She'd seen the way Jack stood, rigid and unyielding. She'd seen the way the sheriff's hand had hovered near his holster, even as he smiled. She tapped a quick note into her notebook. Equinox Biotech. Mustangs. Sheriff connection. Her original assignment was supposed to be a dull article about mountain towns adapting to climate change. She'd expected frostbite, not a conspiracy. But as a reporter, she knew that look. The quiet hostility between 2 people carrying secrets. Clara leaned closer to the window, watching Jack climb into his truck. His movements were precise, deliberate. He didn't look like a hermit running from the world. He looked like a man protecting something. As the engine rumbled to life, she whispered to herself, "That's not a man hiding. That's a man guarding something." She opened her laptop, erased her headline about mountain winters, and typed a new one. The storm didn't end at Cold Ridge. It was just beginning. The morning light on the Wind River Range was sharp and colorless, the kind that revealed everything and warmed nothing. The storm had passed, leaving behind a brittle calm that felt like a held breath. Clara Winslow gripped the steering wheel of her SUV, eyes fixed on the twisting road ahead. The GPS had died 20 minutes ago. Her phone had given up long before that. No signal. The tires slid on a patch of hidden ice. Clara cursed, righted the vehicle, and kept climbing. The road coiled upward along the cliffside, one wrong move away from a 100-foot drop. It felt less like driving and more like trespassing. She had been chasing storms for years, but this one was different. This time, the story had a face. The veteran who'd stood up to Sheriff Danner with a silence sharper than any weapon. On paper, she was driving up the mountain for a human interest piece. The man who saved wild Mustangs. But the truth, the one pulsing under her ribs, was different. She'd heard the sheriff mention Equinox Biotech. She'd seen the look in Danner's eyes. There was a connection there, and whatever this man was hiding on his mountain was at the center of it. The journalist in her couldn't let it go. She rounded another bend. "If he's hiding something," she muttered, "it's not for himself, it's for them." The road narrowed, the snow deepened. When she finally reached a clearing, she saw it. A small, weather-beaten cabin, smoke rising from the chimney like a thin promise of life. She stopped the SUV and stepped out. Her boots crunched through the snow. Tire tracks cut toward the cabin. Hoofprints circled near a makeshift corral. "Time to meet the hermit," she breathed, her own breath clouding before her. She raised a gloved hand and knocked. 3 firm raps that echoed in the stillness. Nothing. Then the sound of slow, deliberate footsteps. A metallic click. The door creaked open. He stood there exactly as she'd pictured him, tall, broad-shouldered, wrapped in a worn leather jacket. His face was rough, wind-burned, his eyes a pale, watchful blue. "Can I help you?" he asked, his voice low and sandpapered. Clara straightened, flashing her press badge. "Clara Winslow, Denver Chronicle. I'm writing about the storm and about what you saved." He just looked at her, the way a man looks at a trap he's seen before. "I don't do stories." The door began to close. Clara's hand shot out. "Neither do they," she said quietly. "But someone wrote one on their skin." That stopped him. For a few heartbeats, the mountain wind filled the space between them. His expression shifted from suspicion to calculation. "You've been digging." "I'm a journalist," she said. "It's what I do." He studied her a moment longer, then sighed, stepping aside. "Coffee's old, but it's hot." Inside, the cabin smelled of pine smoke and oiled metal. Maps covered one wall. Through the back window, Clara saw them. 3 horses, standing motionless in the corral. They didn't look like animals recovering from trauma. They looked disciplined. Jack slid a mug of black coffee toward her. "You drove all this way for a headline?" She took a sip, winced at the bitterness, then met his eyes. "For the truth. And maybe for them." He followed her gaze out the window. Spirit stood nearest the fence, head high. Echo grazed beside him, her scar catching the light. Ash lingered close, copying their every move. "I know what they might be," Clara said. "And I know that people don't carve numbers like E13 into living things unless they want to own them." He looked at her sharply. "How do you know that?" "I saw it. Yesterday, at the diner, the sheriff mentioned Equinox Biotech." For a long moment, he said nothing. Then he set his mug down. "Come on, you might as well see for yourself." They stepped outside. In the corral, Spirit snorted, muscles rippling. Echo raised her head. Clara lifted her camera. "May I?" Jack hesitated, then nodded. She snapped photos. Close-ups of the strange marks, E13 on Spirit's neck, F2 on Echo's shoulder, a faint scar on Ash's throat where a chip had once been. The flash clicked. Spirit tensed. Jack's hand moved instinctively, resting on the stallion's neck. "Easy, boy. She's a friend." Spirit stilled, but his eyes stayed locked on Clara. "You trust them more than people, don't you?" she asked softly. Jack's hand stayed where it was. "They haven't given me a reason not to." Back inside, Clara set up her laptop. The modem light blinked, struggling for a signal. She typed a quick message to Marco, her contact back in Denver, an off-the-grid data analyst who owed her favors. "Cross-check these ID codes. E13, F2, asset tag C3. Possible biotech origin." "You're not scared of stirring up the wrong kind of people?" Jack asked. "Fear is part of the job," she said, "but cover-ups are worse." While they waited, Clara filled the silence. "A year ago, I wrote about Equinox. Officially, they were researching genetic markers for military use. Unofficially, they were trying to enhance cognition in war horses. A project called Elysium." Jack frowned. "Never heard of it." "You wouldn't have. The project got shut down. Leaked rumors said they were experimenting with nerve implants, memory conditioning. Animals went berserk. They buried everything. You think these 3 came from that?" "I think they escaped from something someone didn't want found." The laptop pinged. A new message. Marco's reply read, "Codes confirmed. Registered to Equinox Biotech, Project Elysium, Wyoming sector. Status, terminated. Owner, Hale Danner, Field Liaison." Her breath caught. She turned the screen toward Jack. He read the words once, twice. His eyes hardened. "The sheriff." Outside, a sudden whinny split the air. Spirit's voice, sharp and urgent. Jack crossed the room in 2 strides, nothing but wind stirring the snow. Yet the stallion's tension said otherwise. "He's watching us," Jack exhaled slowly, "or he will be soon." The cabin seemed smaller now, the shadows deeper. "They used them," Jack said, his voice tight, "trained them, and then threw them away." "That's what corporations do." Clara's voice was edged with steel, "but maybe this time they picked the wrong mountain." He turned to her, something raw flickering in his eyes. "You really think you can bring them down?" Not alone, she said, but with proof. With their story. Maybe. Jack was silent, then nodded once, sharp and decisive. You'll get it. But no names, no photos of me. This stays between us. She smiled faintly and extended her hand. Deal. He hesitated, then took it. His grip was rough, steady. From the corral, Spirit let out a soft rumble, as if approving the pact. Later, as the day faded, Clara sat at the wooden table, typing the first line of the story she hadn't dared to write until now, The Lost Soldiers of Project Elysium. Outside, Jack moved through the corral. He rested a hand on Spirit's neck as the sun slipped behind the peaks, painting the snow blood orange. We're not hiding anymore, boy, he murmured. We're fighting smart this time. The horse lifted his head as if he understood. Somewhere down the valley, a lone truck engine started, the kind of sound that didn't belong this high up. The fragile alliance had been forged, and the storm that was coming had nothing to do with the weather. The third night came quiet. Too quiet. The storm had moved on, leaving the mountains wrapped in a deceptive calm. Snow fell in thin, lazy flakes. The world outside looked peaceful. Inside the cabin, peace was a lie waiting to shatter. Jack sat at the table, sharpening his hunting knife in slow, even strokes. The steel rasped softly against the whetstone, a rhythm older than thought. Across from him, Clara sat with papers spread across her lap. Her notes, her photographs, fragments of the truth. The only sounds were the crackle of wood, the rasp of metal, and the faint breathing of the horses outside. Spirit lay in the stall, ears flicking. Echo stood near the door, alert. Ash slept curled beneath her mother's neck. Even in rest, the herd was organized, a formation born of something more than instinct. Hard to believe they were dying a week ago. Clara looked up. Jack didn't look away from the fire. Harder to believe someone wanted them that way. The silence between them wasn't awkward anymore. It was shared. Outside, the wind began to change, carrying a low hum, the kind that whispered of movement far away. Jack's knife paused mid-stroke. He stared into the orange glow. Storm's not done, he said quietly, and somewhere beyond the ridge, something watched. Midnight. The world was drowned in stillness. Clara had fallen asleep in the chair. Jack sat awake, boots by the door. He'd never learned to sleep easy. In another life, this kind of quiet meant ambush. A sound shattered it, the thud of hooves, sudden and violent, followed by a shrill, echoing whinny that tore through the night. Jack was on his feet before thought could catch up. Spirit, he muttered, already moving. He grabbed his flashlight, yanked open the door, and stepped into the cold. The stallion stood rigid in the pen, muscles coiled, eyes wide and burning. He was facing the tree line, neck arched. Echo stamped her hooves, answering his alarm. Jack swept the flashlight across the snow and froze. Through the shifting curtain of white, a faint light flickered. Then another, moving too low for stars, too bright for lanterns, headlights. "Damn it," he whispered. "We've been found." Spirit reared, trumpeting a warning. Jack spun and bolted back inside, slamming the door. "Clara, get up." She jerked awake. "What? Someone's out there." She stumbled to the window just as a sharp pop split the air, a dry, mechanical sound. And then the world outside bloomed in fire. It happened fast, too fast. A bottle streaked through the air, hit the cabin wall, and exploded in a burst of orange and smoke. Flames leapt up the logs. The smell of gasoline filled the room. "Get down!" Jack lunged, grabbing Clara and throwing her to the floor as the window shattered inward. Burning liquid splashed across the table. The heat came instantly, ferocious. The curtains ignited. Smoke curled like black serpents up the rafters. "Jesus!" Clara coughed, eyes streaming. Jack yanked a wool blanket from the bed, throwing it over the nearest flames. "Move! Get to the door!" She scrambled up, choking. He twisted the handle. Jammed! They sealed it. The smoke thickened, stinging the lungs. The horses outside screamed, hooves pounding against wood. "Spirit!" Jack bellowed through the noise. "Break it! Come on, boy!" A heartbeat later came the answer. A thunderous crash, splintering wood. The stall door gave way. Jack smashed the rear window with his elbow, shards cutting his sleeve. He shoved Clara through, then climbed out after her as another flaming bottle hit the porch. The explosion sent sparks showering over the snow. The cabin, his home, his refuge, was a torch burning against the white night. The world outside was chaos, snow and fire and wind colliding. Spirit charged toward them through the smoke, his mane alight with embers. He skidded to a stop, placing his body between them and the burning wreck. Echo circled behind, nudging Ash toward the tree line. Jack cut the last of the corral rope. "To the ridge, boy! Move!" Spirit tossed his head, then wheeled and bolted into the snow. Echo followed, her foal at her flank. Jack grabbed Clara's arm and ran. The snow was deep, slick. Behind them, the cabin screamed as its roof collapsed. Clara slipped. Echo turned back, pressing her shoulder against the woman's side, pushing her up. She helped me," Clara gasped. "Keep moving." Jack didn't look back. They climbed the slope until the wind swallowed the sound of burning wood. When they finally stopped, the world below them glowed red, a single inferno in a field of white. The cabin was gone, nothing left but the skeleton of beams. Jack stood still, snow melting on his face. The fire reflected in his eyes like a past he'd tried to bury. Clara wrapped her arms around herself, her voice trembling. "Everything you had. It's gone." Jack said nothing for a long time, his hand tightened on Spirit's reins. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, raw. "They don't just want the horses." He turned his gaze from the wreck of his home to Clara's face. "They want you dead." His eyes met hers, and in the flickering firelight, she saw it. He wasn't just talking about her, he was talking about himself. "That makes us the same," he finished. The fire hissed, devouring the last of his life. Spirit stepped closer, lowering his massive head until it touched Jack's shoulder. A quiet, wordless gesture between two survivors. Clara watched them, and something inside her shifted from fear to resolve. "Then we show them what survivors look like," she said, her voice steady. Jack looked at her, really looked, and for the first time he nodded. He pulled the knife from his belt and cut the last of the rope from Spirit's reins, letting it fall into the snow. "We'll show them," he murmured. Behind them, the fire flared one final time, painting their figures in silhouette. 2 humans and 3 horses, forged together in loss. When the flames died, only the glow of embers remained, and a silence so vast it felt sacred. Snow began to fall heavier. Jack pulled a folded map from his pocket. "There's a trail," he said, tracing it with a gloved finger. "Through the ridge and into Red Canyon. Used to be a ranger station there, abandoned for years. No roads, no signals." "Perfect." Clara leaned closer. "You've been there?" "Once, long time ago, the kind of place people forget exists." She nodded. "Sounds like exactly what we need." Jack gathered what little they had left. His knife, a flare cartridge, and a photograph scorched at the edges of a younger him in uniform. He tucked it back into his coat. Clara turned toward the fire's dying glow. "They didn't just start a fire," she whispered. She looked at Jack, her eyes fierce beneath the falling snow. "They started a war." Jack's face hardened against the wind. "Then we'll finish it." Spirit stamped his hoof. Echo tossed her head. They mounted the narrow trail into the mountains, the world behind them burning out to black. Ahead lay only white silence and the promise of a reckoning. The night swallowed them whole, 5 shadows moving through the storm, bound by loss, hunted by fire, carried by something stronger than either. The snow never truly stopped in the Wind River Range. It only paused to gather its breath. By the time dawn brushed the sky in a pale wash of grey, they were deep in the back country, moving through a world that no longer felt alive. The forest stretched endless and white. The trail wound downward through a narrow ravine. Ahead, a frozen creek glinted faintly. Jack tested the ice, then motioned for Clara to follow. Halfway across, Spirit's ears twitched. His head lifted, muscles tightening. A low rumble vibrated in his chest. Jack's own instincts flared. He scanned the slope. Through the curtain of falling snow, a faint beam of light appeared. A single headlamp bouncing along the far ridge. "Damn it!" Jack hissed. He grabbed Clara's arm, pulling her and the horses behind a screen of firs. The light drew closer, then stopped. An engine idled, coughed, then shut off. A voice broke through the stillness. "Easy, Monroe. It's me." Jack froze. The voice was familiar. A man stepped out of a truck, flashlight down, hands raised. Snow clung to his coat and beard. "Reeves," Jack muttered. "Deputy Mark Reeves." Reeves walked toward them slowly. "Didn't think you'd remember." "Hard to forget the kid I pulled out of a wreck on the North Pass," Jack said, his voice flat. Reeves laughed softly. "Yeah, kid with a badge too big for his chest. You said that then too." His expression hardened. He scanned the tree line, then lowered his voice. "You need to listen. You're in deep trouble, and not because of that fire." Jack's jaw tightened. "Go on." Reeves reached into his coat and pulled out a small envelope sealed in plastic. Inside were printed photographs, blurry, stamped with red headers. Jack angled his flashlight. Clara leaned closer. The words were clear enough. Specimen Retrieval Report, Elysium Assets E13, F2, C3. Beneath it, an electronic signature, H. Danner. "Sheriff Hale," Clara whispered. Reeves nodded grimly. "He's been on Equinox's payroll for years. Cleanup man. The fire, the missing people, all of it. He covers their tracks. Your horses are listed as lost property. They want them back, or erased." Jack's hand curled into a fist around the reins. "Then they'll have to go through me." Reeves looked at him, a spark of admiration tempered by fear. "They just might try." They found brief shelter under the shadow of the truck. "Equinox had a lab up near Red Canyon," Reeves said, "officially a biological endurance study. In reality, it was Elysium. Genetic modification, behavioral reprogramming." He rubbed his hands together. "Then something happened. A containment failure. 3 specimens lost. They blamed the weather, but I saw the files. E13, F2, and a juvenile, C3. Those are your horses." "And Hale filed the final report." Clara's breath caught. "Claimed the animals died during recovery," Reeves confirmed, "but I think he gave the order to destroy them before anyone could find out they'd survived. Some of the scientists didn't agree. A few filed complaints. None of them were seen again." The wind sighed through the trees. "Red Canyon Station was one of their test sites," Reeves continued. "If there's proof left, it'll be there. But people avoid that place for a reason." Clara's jaw set. "Cursed or not, that's where this ends." Reeves gave her a long look. "You're the reporter from Denver. You've got guts. Maybe too much." He reached into his coat again and pulled out 2 items. A small, rusted key and a folded map. "Gate key, trail map. The road's gone to hell, but it'll get you close." As he handed them over, his voice dropped. "If you go there, watch what you wish to find. Some things stay buried for a reason." Spirit stepped forward suddenly. The stallion extended his muzzle toward Reeves's hand, sniffing once, then exhaling softly. Reeves chuckled, patting the horse's neck. "Guess he remembers who's still on the right side." By the time Reeves's truck disappeared, the night had swallowed the sound of the engine. Jack and Clara stood in the fading red glow of the taillights. The envelope burned like a live coal in Jack's pocket. "You trust him?" she asked quietly. Jack stared into the darkness. "He's one of the few who's earned it. But trust won't keep us warm." They built a small fire beneath a rock overhang. Spirit stood before them all, motionless, his shadow flickering against the rock like a guardian carved from night. "If Equinox tried to erase them," Clara said, her voice softer now, "maybe that's where they failed. These horses survived what no experiment should." Jack looked at her through the firelight. His reply came low, almost to himself. "So did I." The words hung there, binding man and beast, soldier and survivor, in one quiet truth. When the flames burned low, Jack stood. "We leave before dawn. The less light, the better." Clara nodded, watching him move among the horses. In the shifting light, she realized what they had become. Not fugitives, not strangers, but a single unit. A herd, survivors bound by fire. Dawn broke in shades of ash and iron. Red Canyon lay ahead, hidden behind jagged cliffs and skeletal trees. The wind funneled through the narrow pass, carrying the faint scent of metal and something older, something left behind. The trail grew steeper. The world felt stripped bare, as if nothing living was meant to walk here. Spirit slowed, nostrils flaring. He stopped suddenly, pawing at the ground. Echo mirrored him. What's wrong with them? Clara frowned. Jack scanned the ridge. They remember this place. Ahead, the valley opened like a wound in the mountain. Through the mist, an old iron gate stood crooked across the path, half buried in snow. Rusted letters clung to the arch. U.S. Forestry Service, Red Canyon Station. Decommissioned 1998. Jack approached the lock, pulling Reeves's key from his pocket. It took force to turn it. The sound was loud, grating, echoing off the canyon walls. The gate swung open with a groan that seemed to wake the mountain itself. Inside, the station sprawled like the skeleton of a forgotten world. Collapsed buildings, a watchtower listing sideways. The ground was littered with shards of glass, coiled wire, rusted tools. No footprints, no sound, just the whisper of wind through broken boards. If ghosts could talk, Clara murmured, this place would scream. Jack's gaze swept the ruins. Then let's hope it still remembers how. They stepped through the gate, the horses following close. The wind shifted again, carrying faint echoes of metal against stone, something half buried and waiting. For the first time since the fire, Jack felt the weight of what they were walking into. Not just a place, a past that refused to stay dead. Behind them, the gate creaked once more and slowly swung shut, trapping them inside with the ghosts. The main building was a hollow shell. A single beam of weak light cut through a hole in the roof, illuminating a swirl of dust motes in the dead air. The beam caught fragments of a world that shouldn't have been left behind. Overturned metal tables, cracked vials frozen to the floor, a wall chart with faded words. Quarantine. Authorized personnel only. The air smelled of rust, mold, and something faintly metallic, like blood gone cold. Spirit moved ahead with deliberate care, muscles tense. Echo followed, her breath shallow. Little Ash stayed close under her flank, trembling. Clara's boots crunched over broken glass. Her flashlight beam passed over an operating table, a restraint harness, a row of syringes glittering like teeth in the dirt. Jack brushed a hand along the wall, his fingertips finding a rough carving scorched into the wood. No more tests. The letters were jagged, desperate. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The station groaned in the wind. This place feels wrong. Clara's voice came out barely above a whisper. Because it remembers, Jack said, his eyes scanning the darkness. Suddenly, Echo let out a low, restless snort, scraping her hoof against the floorboards. Her head swung toward a far corner. What is it, girl? Jack lifted his flashlight. Echo pawed again, harder. The wood splintered beneath her hooves. Something thudded hollowly beneath the floor. Jack knelt beside her, pressing his ear to the boards. The sound came again, not an echo, but a metallic ring. He drew his knife and pried at the seams. The old wood resisted, then gave way with a crack. Beneath it lay a dark void. The light caught a faint gleam. Jack widened the hole until his hand brushed cold metal. A box. Heavy, rectangular. When he pulled it free, rust flaked off like dust. Stamped across the lid, half obscured by corrosion, was the faded insignia of Equinox Biotech. Oh my God, Clara exhaled. It's real. They dragged the box into the open. Jack wedged an iron rod into the hinge and forced it. The lock snapped with a dry, metallic pop. Inside lay a collection of relics, a thick bundle of folders sealed in cloudy plastic, stamped classified, a small metal drive, its surface engraved. Project Elysium, internal use only, and tucked in the corner, a battered USB stick with a label written by hand. Log files, emergency backup. Clara reached out, brushing dust from the top folder. Beneath her fingers, faint handwritten words emerged. For those who still care. Jack tore open the plastic. Clara took the first file. The pages were yellowed, printed in sterile formatting. Equinox Biotech, Elysium Division. Field Test 4A. Below it, a chart. M1, male. Spirit, combat response successful, obeys visual and tonal cues, elevated pain threshold. Retention 98%, F2, female. Echo, status, pregnant. Behavioral control, incomplete. Aggression spike when offspring threatened. Abort order denied. A final line, the ink darker, hastier. C3, Colt. Ash. Status, termination failure due to maternal interference. Asset considered unstable. Clara's lips moved, reading the words. Each number hit the air like a blow. Echo shifted beside them. Spirit let out a low rumble. They numbered them, Clara swallowed. They were soldiers to them. No, Jack's voice was rough, heavy with an anger that came from a place far older than this. They were prisoners. She turned another page. Scans of brainwave patterns, labeled with words like pain suppression and obedience index. Photographs followed. Close-ups of horse eyes wired to sensors, muscles tensed under restraints. They weren't enhancing them. Clara's voice trembled. They were breaking them. Jack said nothing. His gaze had fixed on Spirit, whose eyes mirrored the lamplight in dark, intelligent sorrow. Slowly, Jack reached out and pressed his hand to the stallion's neck. Spirit flinched, then leaned into the touch. The next folder was different. Thinner, singed at the corners. Across the top, containment failure. December 17th. Clara turned the page. Transport vehicle en route to disposal facility lost during storm. Containment cage compromised. Assets presumed destroyed. Local liaison H. Danner assigned to site cleanup. Case closed. Hail, Danner, Clara said quietly. It was the same night as the blizzard. Jack nodded once. They didn't die in that storm. They escaped. A final handwritten note at the bottom, the ink nearly washed away. If you find this, remember they didn't fail the test. We did. The words lingered in the air like smoke. Echo let out a low, mournful sound, a call that echoed off the stone walls. The truth had been here all along, buried not under ice, but under guilt. Clara shut the folder. She looked up, her eyes bright with something fierce. They tried to erase life, she said quietly. Now life's fighting back. Jack's gaze drifted to Echo, her belly swollen. He remembered the report, pregnant, behavioral control incomplete. That failure was survival, love-defying design. They called it a malfunction, he spoke softly, but it's the only part that still works. What do you mean? Jack's eyes stayed on Echo. She fought back, protected her own. That's what they couldn't engineer. Choice, loyalty, the kind that doesn't come from training. He turned, meeting Clara's gaze. Freedom's not something you give, it's something you fight for. For a heartbeat, neither moved. The truth hung there, not in the papers, but in the breathing proof that stood beside them. Clara picked up her camera and began taking photos of the documents, the drive, the faces of Spirit and Echo. The shutter clicks echoed like small acts of defiance. It's their story, she murmured. You sure you want to open that world again? Jack asked. Once you do, there's no going back. Clara lowered the camera. Someone already burned your home to keep this buried. I'm not letting them burn the truth. For the first time in a long while, Jack smiled, faint but real. Then we finish what they started, he said, but our way. They packed what they could. Clara sealed the folder and slid the drive and USB into a waterproof pouch. Before leaving, Jack turned back one last time. The words carved on the wall, "No more tests," seemed to glow faintly. No more cages either, he whispered. Outside, dawn was beginning to bleed into the canyon. As they rode away, the rising sun struck the old equinox sign. The light turned the rusted letters gold before fading. Behind them, the snow began to fall again, gentle and endless, erasing their tracks. But the truth they carried now would not stay buried. The world was holding its breath again. A heavy fog draped over the Wyoming ridge like smoke that refused to rise. The cold turned silence into pressure. Jack's truck sat half buried in the snow near a frozen creek. Inside, the cabin glowed faintly blue from Clara's laptop screen. Spirit stood outside, his breath curling in clouds, watching the dark like a sentry. Clara's fingers trembled slightly as she connected the power cable to the truck's battery. The laptop flickered, whirred, then steadied, a pulse of light in the dark. Password required, the screen read. She dug through the worn folder until she found a crumpled sheet of paper. Hensley. Elysium Trial 4. Robert Hensley. The name of the project's lead researcher. The one man Clara guessed had tried to leave breadcrumbs. She typed it in. The screen froze, then opened. A grainy video feed filled the display. Harsh white light, sterile walls, shadows of cages. The camera tilted, as if the operator's hands were shaking. In the video, two horses, one black, one dapple grey, strained against metal frames. Wires ran from their flanks to glowing monitors. A voice, clinical and calm, narrated, "Pain suppression test, E13, F2, non-compliant, termination scheduled." A low hum filled the cabin, the sound of machinery and suffering. "They called this research," Jack muttered. "They called it control," Clara whispered back, her voice cracking. The video shuddered, alarms blared, the camera dropped, catching only flashing lights, a blur of hooves, a man's scream, "Containment breach, they're loose." Then the feed cut to black. Outside, Echo snorted sharply, as if to echo the final cry. "That's when they ran," Clara said softly. Jack reached forward and closed the laptop. He sat in silence while the wind pressed against the truck. After a long minute, Clara reopened the screen. Her movements were steady now. She compressed the video, encrypted the data, and prepared to send it. "You're really doing this?" Jack asked quietly. She nodded. "If truth has teeth, it's time it bites." Julian Ortiz's tired face blinked onto the screen a few minutes later, the glow of city lights framing him a world away. "Clara," he said, rubbing his eyes, "it's 3 in the damn morning. This better be history." "It's proof," she said. One by one, she uploaded the files, the Equinox logos, the codes, the footage, the internal memos. Julian leaned closer, his expression shifting from fatigue to disbelief, then to grim focus. "Jesus Christ," he murmured, "this isn't just cruelty. It's a defense contract. If this goes live, it'll light up DC." Clara's reply was simple, "Then let it." The sound of static filled the line. Finally, Julian nodded once, firmly. "I'll get the legal team on it. We publish at dawn, but you get somewhere safe. You hear me?" The call ended. The laptop's glow faded, leaving only the soft reflection of Clara's face. Exhausted, pale, resolute. "You just lit the fuse," Jack said from the driver's seat, his voice quiet, almost proud. She looked out the window where Spirit stood guard, snow dusting his mane like ash. "Then let's watch it burn." Dawn came grey and slow. A weak sun bled through the clouds. Clara sat by the truck, her satellite phone buzzing with a cascade of notifications. The first headline nearly took her breath away. "The Ghosts of Mustang Ridge." Front page, Denver Chronicle. Beneath it, a subhead in bold. "They were meant to be erased. They chose to live." Her trembling fingers scrolled down. Embedded in the article were stills from the video. Blurred faces, cold labs, the eyes of Spirit and Echo staring into the lens. Save the Mustangs was already trending. Animal rights groups reposted it. Veterans shared it. By mid-morning, major networks were airing the footage. A senator from Colorado demanded a federal investigation into Equinox Biotech. "We did it, Jack," Clara's voice wavered. "They can't bury this now." Jack poured another cup of coffee, his eyes on the horizon. "They'll try anyway. Men like that don't go quiet. They go cornered." And somewhere in Cold Ridge, a door slammed. Inside his office, Sheriff Hale Danner stood over a pile of newspapers, his face blotched red. He slammed his fist on the desk. "They turned me into the villain of a fairy tale." His smile twisted. "Fine. We'll write our own ending." By noon, flyers were plastered across town. "Community meeting tonight. Sheriff Danner addresses media lies." When Jack and Deputy Reeves drove past, Reeves shook his head. "He's setting a trap." Jack's reply was low and certain. "Then let's walk right into it." By sunset, Cold Ridge looked nothing like itself. The streets glowed with camera lights and satellite vans. The town hall was overflowing. On the stage, Sheriff Hale stood in full uniform, badge polished, flanked by 2 men in suits, the Equinox attorneys. "These online lies," Hale said into the microphone, "have hurt this community. We're simple people here, not part of some grand conspiracy." One of the lawyers stepped forward. "Equinox Biotech categorically denies all allegations. These so-called videos are fabricated." Cameras flashed. The audience murmured, restless. Then the doors at the back of the hall burst open. A ripple passed through the crowd as Jack Monroe walked in, his coat worn, his boots heavy with mud and snow. Behind him came Clara Winslow, calm but fierce, and Deputy Mark Reeves, his badge gleaming under the harsh lights. From outside came a sound no one expected, the solid, resonant rhythm of hooves on pavement. 3 horses stepped through the doorway, Spirit first, black as midnight, Echo beside him, proud and scarred, Ash, smaller but steady, between them. Gasps filled the hall, cameras turned. Jack stopped halfway down the aisle, his voice deep and even. "You can chain a horse, but you can't chain the wild. You can burn my home, but not what I've learned." The crowd froze. Spirit lifted his head and let out a long, rolling cry that filled the rafters. Sheriff Hale's face drained of color. "Get them out," he shouted. "They're trespassing." Reeves stepped forward. "No, sir, they're witnesses." He drew a folded document from his jacket, the seal of the Federal Bureau of Investigation stamped across it. "And you're under investigation." For a second, Hale just stared. Then his hand went to his holster. "You think I'll let some washed-up soldier and a journalist ruin everything?" Jack didn't move. Spirit shifted closer, his eyes bright with warning. "FBI, hands where we can see them." The side doors exploded open. A dozen agents in black jackets poured in. The lead agent stepped forward, his voice clear and steady. "Hale Danner, you are under arrest for conspiracy, obstruction of justice, and destruction of evidence." Chaos erupted. Cameras clicked like gunfire. Hale struggled against the agents. "You think you're saving them?" He spat at Jack. "You're killing everything that keeps order." Jack's reply came quiet, almost gentle. "Then maybe order needs to die." Spirit snorted, stamping the floor, a thunderclap in miniature. The sound silenced the crowd. One reporter whispered, almost reverently, "That sound. It's freedom." Clara raised her camera and caught the image. Spirit, haloed in light, standing beside Jack amid the chaos. The frame that would travel across the world. The next morning, headlines roared like aftershocks. FBI arrests, sheriff in Mustang experiment scandal. Equinox Biotech collapses after federal raid. Every front page bore the same photo of Spirit in the Coldridge Town Hall. Equinox Biotech officially announced its dissolution. The Senate called for hearings. In Coldridge, the people who had once whispered in fear now stood proud. Outside the courthouse, banners fluttered. "Chuck saved the Mustangs." Deputy Reeves, now acting sheriff, gave a brief press conference under falling snow. "Sometimes," he said simply, "justice doesn't wear a badge. Sometimes it has hooves." From a distance, Jack and Clara watched in silence. "You did it," she said, her eyes soft. He shook his head, glancing toward a makeshift corral where Spirit, Echo, and Ash grazed. "We all did. Them most of all." "What now?" Clara smiled faintly. Jack's breath curled in the cold. A rare, quiet smile touched his face. "Now," he said, "we give them a place they don't have to run from." Spirit lifted his head as if understanding. Ash broke into a sudden gallop, circling the snowy field, alive, unbound. For the first time in years, Jack felt the same. The wind shifted through Coldridge, carrying the echo of freedom. Part horse, part man, part truth, finally spoken. The snow had melted months ago, but its memory still lingered in the wind. Spring light poured down the slopes of the Wind River Range, soft and forgiving, as if nature itself had decided to start over. Hale Danner's trial had ended. 25 years in federal prison, 2 Equinox executives received life sentences. Television anchors spoke the headlines with the measured tone of history being written. Julian Ortiz, on an evening news segment, said, "This wasn't just about animals. It was about what happens when power forgets compassion." Coldridge, once an invisible dot on the map, was now a symbol. Visitors drove up the mountain road just to take pictures with the new wooden sign at its edge. "Welcome to Coldridge, the town that fought for the wild." And somewhere beyond the reach of all cameras, Jack Monroe stood by a weathered fence, watching the wide plain stretch before him. He wasn't smiling, but his eyes had found something deeper: peace. Clara Winslow's name had become a headline too. She was nominated for the National Investigative Journalism Award. When her editor offered her a promotion to the Washington bureau, her reply came in a quiet, handwritten letter. The best stories aren't out there. They're the ones that never end. Instead of leaving, she rented a small log cabin a mile from Jack's land. From there, she began her next project, a series called The New Frontier, where freedom runs wild. Reeves, now officially Sheriff Mark Reeves, stopped by most weeks. One afternoon, leaning on the rail, he said, "Funny thing, I keep trying to protect this place, but it's this place that keeps protecting us." "Do you ever miss the quiet?" Clara asked Jack, lowering her camera. Jack glanced at the horses, his voice warm. "Quiet's overrated. Life's louder here." By late summer, the land had been transformed. The Mustang Sanctuary opened its gates. A wooden sign, carved by Jack's own hand, hung above the entrance. Mustang Sanctuary, where the wild still runs. The opening ceremony was small but full. Ranchers, students, families, veterans. Reeves stood at the podium. "Some heroes wear boots," he said, glancing at Jack. "Some wear hooves." The crowd applauded. Jack kept to the edges, watching Spirit graze with his usual quiet authority. Echo stayed near the paddock, where her new foal, Sable, born under a spring thunderstorm, was learning to run. In the afternoon, a moment silenced everyone. A young boy, deaf since birth, stood trembling near Spirit's pen. Jack knelt beside him, showing him how to approach. He lifted the boy's hand, open and flat. Spirit lowered his massive head and touched it with his muzzle, gentle as wind on water. Clara wrote later, "Sometimes healing isn't taught, it's witnessed." That day, the sanctuary didn't feel like a ranch, it felt like a promise kept. A year later, the light was gold again, not harsh like the old winters, but warm like forgiveness. From the ridge above the sanctuary, Clara stood with her camera. Below her, the Mustangs ran free. Spirit led the charge. Echo ran close beside him, and between them, Ash, now grown and strong, his dark coat gleaming bronze under the setting sun. Jack climbed the hill behind her. "End of the series?" he asked. "The last photo?" He stopped beside her, watching the herd thunder below. "Maybe we both found what we were looking for," he said softly. Clara lowered the camera, the wind tossing her hair. "Freedom can't be owned, only shared." Jack nodded slowly, his eyes fixed on the horizon where Ash broke into a full gallop. The young stallion kicked up golden dust that caught the light like sparks. Spirit answered with a deep cry. Echo echoed him, a harmony that filled the open sky. For a moment, Jack closed his eyes. The sound washed through him, not of war, not of storms, but of life continuing. The camera's shutter clicked one final time. Months later, National Geographic published a special issue. Across the cover, under the title "The New Frontier," was Clara's photograph of Ash in mid-gallop. The subheading read, "Born from experiment, freed by compassion." In the final paragraph, Clara wrote, "Some ghosts don't haunt us. They guide us home." Outside, the evening light painted the ranch in hues of amber and rose. Jack leaned on the same weathered fence, watching Spirit graze. "Guess we finally stopped running, huh, boy?" he murmured. Spirit lifted his head, tossed his mane skyward, a gesture halfway between defiance and peace. Behind them, Echo nudged her grown colt, and Ash took off across the field, hooves drumming against the earth. The herd followed, their silhouettes stretching long against the horizon. The sound of hooves, wind, and distant thunder said everything. Thank you for staying with us until the end of this story. We'd love to hear from you. Share your thoughts in the comments below and let us know your favorite part. If you enjoyed the journey, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more captivating stories like this one. And don't miss out. Hit the notification bell so you're always updated on our latest content.